I want to thank everybody for coming out today. This is, we're going to have a public information meeting about the potential removal of the Lower Collinsville Dam, also known as the Collins Company Lower Dam. My name is Ramona Good. I'm in the State Dam section for the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. So I'm just going to introduce some of the people that are here in the group and that will be presenting about the removal. In the back, working the PowerPoint is Charles Lee. He's the Assistant Director for the State Dam Safety Programs. Then up front we have Matt Golkowski. He is our Supervising Fisheries Biologist. Then we have James Turek for NOAA. Oh, and Jake Diditz from Princeton Hydro. So just little things. Oh, we're trying to start promptly because the library does close at 8:30, so we need to be gone. So thank you. All right, Chuck. So we're just gonna go, I'm gonna go over a little bit what we're gonna be talking about the dam. We're gonna talk about the ownership, the current conditions. There's some historic photographs of when the dam was first built. There was a sediment analysis, site assessment, hydraulics and hydrology, the next steps, the federal regulatory compliance, and benefits to fish passage and the fisheries. So let's start with a little history about the Collins Company Lower Dam. As we know, maybe some of you don't know, there's this lower dam and then there's the upper dam. So the upper dam was first constructed in 1867 and the lower dam was constructed in 1912 with hydropower and the two associated buildings. There's a gatehouse and a powerhouse that goes along with the dam. In about 1965, the Collins Company closed, and the ownership of both the upper dam and the lower dam was donated to the state of Connecticut. So since about the 1960s, there have been no hydropower has been on that dam. So what does it mean that the state of Connecticut is the owner of the dam? So DEP, Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, on behalf of the state, of all the dams that they own, we are responsible for the day-to-day operation and maintenance of the dams, compliance with the regulatory requirements. That means we have to comply with the same regulations that private dam owners. We will still have to apply for permits. We still have to go through the dam safety process. And we are also in charge of the oversight of any repairs, upgrades, constructions, and contracts, associated contracts with the dam that includes removals. So the dam is located in the town, it spans the two towns of Avon and Burlington, and it's located on the Farmington River. A good portion of the Farmington River has been designated wild and scenic. That means in about the mid-1960s, Congress passed the Wild and Scenic Act, which preserved or designated rivers that had outstanding recreational, cultural, and natural values so that they want to keep. So there's an upper Wild and Scenic and there's a lower Wild and Scenic, and I think we might have some folks from this group here, so if you can correct me if I say anything wrong, just that. So the lower Wild and Scenic consists of 61.7 miles, including the Salmon Brook watershed, and then there's the upper Wild and Scenic, which is about 15.1 miles. Between the two dams, the upper dam and the lower dam, that is the exclusionary portion of the Farmington River. So that area is not designated as wild and scenic. So as I mentioned, there's the upper dam and the lower dam. The upper dam is located in Canton and was retrofitted for hydropower and a new fishway, which Matt will be talking about a little later on. And there was a study done in 2011 that looked at the feasibility of putting hydropower on both the upper dam and the lower dam. It was determined, and I'm not heavily involved with the upper dam, but I know it was determined for the lower dam, it was not economically feasible to put hydropower on the lower dam. A part of that, putting hydropower on the lower dam, would include putting flashboards across the dam and raising the water of the reservoir about 3 feet. So this is one of the reasons we also want to remove the dam. Besides there's a major component of fish passage, it's not economically feasible at all to do hydropower. So in about 2021, the state sent out a request for proposals for consultants to prepare a conceptual phase 1 design for the removal of a dam. And after a competitive process, Princeton Hydro was selected by the state to prepare a conceptual design, which was completed at the end of 2022. And we have Jake here from Princeton Hydro, and he's going to go over some of the results from the conceptual design.
Thanks, Ramona. My name is Jake Dittus. I'm an engineer with Princeton Hydro. And Princeton Hydro is a consulting firm, as Ramona mentioned. We're made up of scientists and engineers, and we're working under the mission to change our ecosystems, quality of life, and communities for the better. We have four groups. They've touched this project or will touch this project in different ways. Natural resource management, water resources engineering, which is where I sit on the team, geosciences and regulatory compliance. Yeah, next slide, Chuck. I'm a little younger in the left picture there, but I'm not the only one on the team by any means. Casey is is on the Zoom link. He's a senior fluvial geomorphologist and is the technical lead on this project. Jeff Gall is the director of our company, or the head of our company, and is the engineer of record. Next slide. And as Ramona mentioned, we're working with DEEP and NOAA and Princeton Hydro. We're making up the team who developed this concept plan. We work with NGOs from Maryland through Massachusetts and in Connecticut as well. NGOs, towns, states, and federal entities in order to do ecological restoration projects like this one. And so that brings us to the project goals. The main goal here is to eliminate a passage barrier to migratory fish. That we'll do that by removing the obsolete dam and reconnecting a free-flowing, ecologically productive, and natural river. As Ramona talked about in the wild and scenic slide, you have a gem here with the Farmington River. It's gorgeous, and I'm sure most of you are here because of that reason. And this is looking to expand that free-flowing nature, developing additional spawning habitat for American shad, river herring, sea lamprey, and American eel are the target species. Matt will speak about that in detail later on. But the goal of this project centers around that fish passage component, and that's what NOAA is interested in. That's what Connecticut DEEP is interested in, and obviously that's what we're interested in. So that's kind of our guiding light for this design. You are probably here because you know where this dam is, but in case you don't, the upper dam is up here. That's where Ramona mentioned. This is the lower dam. Avon is on the east, and Burlington is on the west side of the river. There's the Farmington Canal Greenway that in this area that you may have seen the dam from. So that's where the project is located. Oh, there we go.
That was close.
I was almost drawing. So as Ramona mentioned, there's a few different components to the dam. Obviously, we have the spillway, which is what you see across the river. That's 300 feet wide. On the river right side, the Burlington side, the dam abutment stands pretty high. You can see from the Farmington Canal Greenway what that looks like. And then if you look across, if you stand on that bank and look across the river, you'll be able to see the gatehouse, which historically allowed impounded water to flow into the raceway and then down through the powerhouse, which, when the dam was in operation, generated power. So that's what the site looks like well, I don't know what scale this is, but at a high scale. And a couple photos will follow. You're good, Chuck. So this is, if you're standing on the Farmington Canal Greenway, looking across the river, you see the gatehouse and obviously the spillway. That concrete retaining wall holds the raceway, so the raceway is behind that. And then out of the picture downstream is that gatehouse. If you're standing here looking across, you'll see the Farmington Canal Greenway and the River Right abutment. So that's what it looks like. As an engineer, I think I have to geek out over old plans. This is from the 1912 design of the dam. This is in plan view, so that looking, from an aerial looking down onto the dam, we have the 300-foot spillway, the River Right abutment, and the River Left gatehouse and raceway in this picture. And then if you can imagine the dam being a cake and cutting it at the B to B at this location, you'd see what the profile of the dam looks like. It's an OG spillway with all concrete. And the important thing for our design, the concept design, was this little note here that says bedrock. So this dam is tied into bedrock, and we can see it in the next slide, which is the cross-section view of the dam. Yeah, please. Well, you can't really see, but you gotta trust me that this black line is talking about bedrock, or points to bedrock. Why that is important for us is because one, in the 1900s when they built this dam, they manipulated that underlying bedrock in order to construct the dam on top of it and key it into place. And then two, for us, when we remove, if the dam goes to removal and is removed, that bedrock will become a control point for the river. There's no elevation difference there that's going to happen. That bedrock is locked in place, and so it's important for us to know that. And so we hit the jackpot in this design, or in this, with these documents. Not only did we get plans, but we got some really cool historical photos from the Burlington Library. Come on.
I've got it.
So this is from 1910, 1912, during the construction of the dam. This is the River Right abutment, so you may have been looking at it from that canal, Farmington Canal Greenway. It's pretty impressive that they documented this. There's the sluice gates that are boarded up in this picture, and you can see the different lifts of concrete making the final spillway height. This is the final spillway height, and that's the first floor. But you can see all the bedrock that has been manipulated and in this area to allow for that concrete pouring of that dam. So it's a pretty cool picture. You can go to the next one, Chuck. This is just another cool picture. This is kind of like the Model T of excavators or something like that. And then we got a railroad line to move materials. And you can see here, this is a coffer dam. This is looking from the east at the dam under construction. And then you can also see just all the ropes and pulleys system here to move construction equipment around. So pretty cool that we have this shot, and the next shot is pretty similar. We can see a coffer dam. This is that bedrock on the River Right side. This is the canal, or the Farmington Canal now, but it is now. It was a railroad at that time, obviously, and the other point of emphasis here is that the channel is much smaller than how wide it is now. It's been a little bit widened. Next picture, and this is the last of the historical tour. Just another example of the coffer dam that they use to keep the working area dry. This is looking at view from the west of the project site under construction. So what's all that look like today? This is looking from on the river left side. This is that the concrete retaining wall for that raceway. It poses a nice background for some graffiti artists. spillway, and then that is the gatehouse from looking downstream to upstream. This is inside that gatehouse. These are the gate. This is the exit. So water would come in from the other side of the building, flow underneath through the gates and into the raceway. These are what the structures that would control the elevation of the gates and change the water, how much water was allowed to come in and out. That's Casey, who's on Zoom, but he was there in person. Yeah, next slide. This is the raceway, so we're standing in the gatehouse looking downstream. Water would flow through here. And next slide. Into the powerhouse. So this is down a little bit downstream of the dam now. Water would flow from the raceway into the channel, generating power in its prime. Next slide. So that was kind of a tour of the site and a historical tour. Now I'm going to talk through the concept design that and kind of the steps that went into that. I won't really touch on the wetland delineation or the topographic survey, but those were completed by our subcontractors, and then the bathymetric mapping went into the sediment assessment. The sediment assessment's pretty important, both the quality and quantity, and I'll touch on that for a few slides. And then the site assessment of the existing buildings, the hydrologic and hydraulic modeling, and the concept where we ended up with the conceptual design plan. So the sediment assessment is important because rivers are obviously water. What we can see is moving water, but it's also moving this underlying sediment. And so when a dam is in place, not only is the water backed up, but it creates a sediment trap for impounded sediment to fall out at the dam. And so understanding whether that sediment behind the dam is more or less contaminated than downstream and upstream reaches, the background reaches of the channel are really important. And so Princeton Hydro developed a sediment sampling plan and got it approved by DEEP to collect seven samples, one downstream of the dam and one in the upper impoundment in order to identify some background levels, and then 5 in the heart of the impoundment. We collected the samples from a john boat using this stainless auger, using the EPA decontamination protocol. So this was at the end of a long stainless steel rod where we drilled in to the earth between as deep in the unconsolidated sediment as I could get it, which was a couple feet. And then we brought those samples to the lab, tested it for metals, semi-volatiles, VOCs, PFAS, pesticides, herbicides, PCBs, chromium, cyanide, and hydrocarbons. This is a pretty standard suite of analytes that we do in all dam removal projects, all projects that involve dredging and sediment in rivers and waterways. Next slide, please. And so we look at that list of analytes and compare it to the ecological and human health criteria. The Connecticut residential direct exposure criteria is pretty conservative because it takes into account 30 years of daily exposure, and so that's a human health criteria. Then the NOAA threshold effect concentration and probable effect concentration are ecological criterias. The TEC is a threshold below which we don't expect to see any harm to the environment. The PEC is above which there may be an impact to the underlying ecology. And then the groundwater class GA pollutant mobility criteria. These are all mouthfuls, but I'm providing background information for you. In this area, the groundwater is considered class GA, which means that it can be used for residential or consumption without any treatment. And so this is a criteria that just makes sure that the groundwater is getting protected and there's no leaching happening. And so with that, you can kind of forget that slide, because the important slide is next, where the majority of contaminants were not detected or detected below corresponding ecological and human health criteria. There were a few exceedances related to the urban runoff that we see, but this was not something that, but it matched the background levels for the whole system. And so overall, the results indicate that the impounded sediment does not pose an elevated risk to humans or water resources. And the results support either the on-site handling of the sediment or the passive release to downstream reaches as the dam is removed. So that was for sediment quality. Sediment quantity is important to make sure that if the dam is removed, or God forbid gets blown out and the sediment is released, making sure that the quantity is not something that would suffocate the downstream ecology and get brought into the stream and would be able to be utilized as positive bed load. So to map out the quantity of sediment, we performed a bathymetric survey using a sounder, measuring the top and bottom of that unconsolidated sediment. You can see this is a map showing the results. Basically, it was 0 to 5 feet throughout the impoundment of unconsolidated sediment. It's not an efficient sediment trap, meaning that the water depth here is about what it will be when the dam is removed. It might widen a little bit. The channel might widen a little bit, but it's not like there's a whole pile of sediment here. We're seeing in this inner bend, like 5 or so feet as the max of the depth of sediment. And so we estimated that the sediment impounded behind this dam to be about 18,000 cubic yards, which probably doesn't mean anything to you guys, but what it does mean is that it's less than a year of the estimated annual sediment yield, which means that the river, without a dam being there, would mobilize about 3 times that, at least 3 times that volume on its own. And so with that in mind, the sediment, if it was passively released, would be able to be absorbed into the downstream channel without any impacts to mussels or other ecology downstream. And so at this point, the method of dealing with the sediment management is proposed. Passive release is what we're proposing.
What does that mean when it's at home? What does it mean in plain English that they have to release?
Passive release means that we're letting the sediment go downstream and move downstream without using. So the dam will be removed by big yellow machines, but the yellow machines will not go up into the impoundment and scrape off this sediment and move it somewhere. It will be just able to migrate downstream and transport it naturally, as if the river was, as if it was a natural transport process. Is that English enough?
It's closer.
Closer. All right. Thank you. So the takeaway is that sediment quantity also not an issue in this case. It would not harm the ecology downstream. So for the site assessment of the existing buildings, our subcontractor did this and looked and found, due to the age of the structures, asbestos materials in the roof and the floor of the powerhouse, lead in the debris and wood framing of the powerhouse and gatehouse, but not PCBs. And so obviously that leads to a responsible, we need a responsible disposal plan. The potentially hazardous material that with that asbestos and lead will be considered such and disposed of properly. The painted brick will be considered solid waste and disposed of off-site, and the concrete and unpainted brick is proposed to be buried on site at this point.
Are you gonna have questions and answers at the end, or?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
Are we?
yeah.
Does the removal of the dam, if that happens, include the removal of the pump, the powerhouse, and the wall that creates the raceway?
The two buildings will be removed. The raceway will be filled with dam material.
Okay, so the upper line and the lower building.
Yes, the two buildings. Yep, yep. Yeah.
18,000 yards of material
Yeah.
to the common person that doesn't conceptualize what that is. You see a big triaxle truck going
Yeah.
down the road, that holds 18 yards.
Yeah.
18 yards. They're talking about 18,000 yards that's just gonna free flow down the river, for one. The burying on site, now you skipped over all the property owners around that. Where are you gonna bury it? Because the road and the property all along the river is owned by MDC, Eversource, and the state of Connecticut. So there's not one section that you can go and dig a big hole. There's
Yeah.
3 property owners involved in this.
Yep, yep, and we're working with those property owners and Ramona can speak to that status a little bit more, but we're working with them. They're all aware. Connecticut Deep obviously is aware of the project. They're here.
But what I'm saying is, if
and-
you're
and-
proposing that you're gonna bury it on site, it already has to be in a plan that you have
Yep.
developed.
Yep, I'll get to it. Yeah, I'll show where it is. Give me 2 slides.
Yep.
All right, Chuck. So the H&H analysis, the hydrology and hydraulic analysis is twofold. It has 2 goals. One is to understand what the storm flows look like before and after the dam is removed, and then 2, looking at the fish passage flows. The whole idea is to allow for fish passage. And so we wanted to make sure that it looks passable after the dam is removed. And so the flows here are a little bit determined by the upstream releases from the MDC. And so we looked at that we studied that to look at the hydrology, the amount of water through the system, and then the hydraulic analysis. This is a screenshot of HECRAS, a profile in HECRAS. And what we see in the storm flows is pretty common among dam removals. The 100-year existing water surface elevation. Oh, so back up. This is a profile. Here's the dam. This is looking upriver at the impoundment up to the pedestrian bridge and then the upper dam. And so what we see for the 100-year storm under existing conditions is that the water surface is backwatered up to the base of the upper dam. In proposed conditions, the green line, we'll see it as a free-flowing river, and so water surface is reduced a little bit in the flood in the flood flows. So locally reduced flooding a bit, and then we also checked the fish passage flows and made sure that there was sufficient water depth and reduced and velocities were suitable for fish passage, which they are. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here and Jim wouldn't be here. So that is that's what we're looking at with the H&H assessment, and then we'll get. I think the next slide is the concept design. So the idea is to remove as much. The tenets of the concept design is to remove as much spillway as possible and feasible to achieve the project goals of fish passage. To remove the defunct gatehouse and powerhouse. To fill the raceway with dam materials to the extent feasible. And minimize the natural resource and historic resource impacts of the site. And to restore the floodplain with native plant community and plant some native plants along the now exposed floodplain.
Chuck, go back. What's the red?
Oh, yeah, so this is this is the area of, this would be the access way, and then this is the area of potential of the project area, basically. And so the access way is proposed to use this northern route, which does cross the MDC easements, and then it extends down to the gatehouse and the powerhouse as well as the dam, and then some of the lower impoundment.
So the conceptual design, where's the floodplain that you're gonna be restoring with native plant? What happens to the size of the river? Do you see what
Yeah.
this is, Farmington River?
Yep, yep.
What happens to that?
So the dam is about 300 feet wide, and so that's for scale. The natural bankful width of the channel is about 120 feet, and so it's a little overly widened here, and so we'll shrink to what the downstream, not shrink, but it will narrow to what the downstream reach looks like. And so it will hug, it'll be something like this wide and so the floodplain will become exposed, and that's as the dam lowers and the floodplain become exposed, that's the floodplain that we'll be planting.
So is it mostly on the eastern side? Where we're gonna lose, we're not getting shrinkage, I get that, but where we're gonna lose width? It's gonna be on the eastern side?
Yes, well, it depends on it'll be primarily the outer bends will stay the same of the river. So if you're looking at this side, we have a couple of meander bends in the river, and so the outer bends will remain pretty consistent, and then the inner bend is where the floodplain will become exposed. And then as it transitions over, this is likely become a riffle where it on both sides will become have a little more exposed floodplain.
So it's gonna kinda go from being a lake to a river?
Exactly. It'll look very similar to the downstream reach. Yep.
So one way to say it, Jake, is that the floodplain isn't necessarily exposed, it's putting back the original floodplain that had been there, and hopefully it'll restore itself over time, like as Jake said. I mean, there's a movement of sediments through the system, and so over time, like you said, on the inside of the bend, you'll tend to have accretion of sediment, and therefore the floodplain will build itself back where it's now a lake, a pond, if you will.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And the cool thing about that is this impounded sediment that will become re-exposed has a native seed bank from when the dam was 100 years ago when the dam is there, and it's just been sitting there, and that's in the soil waiting for light. And when it becomes re-exposed, we've seen over time and time again in that first growing season, it'll pop up with an awesome array of native seeds.
Just to go back to when you were looking at the gradient, it looks like it looked like, if I read that right, there's 30 feet of gradient or so in about a mile and a half. And it looked like it was you were expecting it to be continuous.
Yeah, pretty continuous. Yep.
So it should be moving along through that whole area without any static section.
Yep.
So on your slide where it's marked Farmington River,
Yeah.
that's, in the area between the upper dam and the lower dam is what you call the impoundment area?
Yep.
Okay, so in that area, the impoundment area, what do you anticipate the width to go from to and the depth to go from and to?
Yeah. So the depths will the bankful depth for this river is about 6 feet, and so it will be there will be some pools, and so it's we can't say the exact location, but around 6 feet. From right now, it's about 12 feet deep in the deepest part of that of what I'm calling the impoundment, which is the pool behind or the lake behind the dam.
And it'll move from essentially a lake.
To a free flowing, yeah. Yep.
And one last question, removal of as much spillway as necessary or feasible, so does that mean you might not take the whole 300 feet?
We are going to take the full 300 feet. It's a matter of how deep we go. And that is something we have to look at in the next phases. Yeah, I'm gonna have this be the last question, and then I'll get through my parts and let Ramona get through the rest of the presentation. But yeah,
My question is, does the powerhouse
yeah.
have to be removed? Can it be repurposed for something else?
I guess the question is, what are you thinking about repurposing?
Could it be donated to the town, a science center, a restaurant, a house? It's got a nice location right by the river. Can it be used for something else, or does it have to be demolished?
Well, I think Jake pointed out there are contaminants, so that would have to be done with the contaminants, and then it would have to be a conversation, if the town would want it, that's a conversation.
Well,
with
is
the
the town been asked if they wanted it?
No, the town is not, we could always engage with the town, but
Okay.
there's also there's
That's-
questions of access.
That's my question, because the building looks like it's structurally not that bad. Yeah, it has some kind of pollutant stuff you have to get rid of, but that's happened in a lot of old buildings where people took care of them and did something with them. And it's got a historic site there. I go by it every day because I bike that way, and it's gonna be kind of sad to take the building down when it's unnecessary, really.
A
Well,
developer approached the state about buying that and turning it into a restaurant, and because the state owns it, it's a liability issue with the
Well, I
contaminants.
did
So
the
they
same.
won't, they
Sell
won't,
it.
they won't
I
do
would
it.
say and I understand the historic aspect, that's why we and Jim
Okay.
would probably talk about, we are working with the State Historic Preservation Office in regards to this, and I've talked to town and Avon and trying to figure out, as we see, we have historical photographs.
Okay.
So, it's a good point, it's something that we should think about, and, go ahead, Chuck.
No, we have slides to discuss this later on, so
Okay.
let's move on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, next. So this is the to the question earlier of where the sediment and dam material would go. Most of it will be buried in the raceway under 2 feet of earth, and then the other possible area is to build up the river left bank to get it to a more natural side, or to match the bank full width of what the channel is expected to be. That will happen regardless of whether we do anything or not. It's just a matter of whether we want it, when we leave the site, we want that river left bank to be naturalized, or whether it happens in 30 years or 50 years so it'll happen regardless. It's just a matter of when. And that's something that we'll tease out as we go through the next design phase. And so the next steps. So this is what we've done so far. We're at a concept design. It'll go from there to a final design and ultimately construction. It'll require a couple additional site investigations to get a couple more data points, and a full historical assessment. Landscape renderings, which help visualize what this will look like, and additional public outreach and input and more meetings. Hopefully y'all are available in those future dates. And then determining a demolition sequence, and then all that information will go into a engineering design, 60%, and ultimately 90% design, which will work with our regulatory team to submit permits for. And I think that is it for me, so I'm gonna turn it over to Jim.
Next slide.
Yeah, next slide.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming tonight. So, again, my name is Jim Turk. I work with NOAA's Restoration Center. The RC is part of the National Marine Fisheries Service, so I'm actually working on behalf of fish and other living marine resources, and that includes migratory fish like American shad and river herring and American eel. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here, and so my role in doing this work, and I've been doing it for 24 plus years with the RC, is relative to dam removals and other types of fish passage, is to provide technical assistance and then also funding. So we have grant funding to actually advance these projects hopefully to completion. And And so in 2021, the state of Connecticut was awarded funds from NOAA to work on the project. So the funds that have been allocated to the state so far are for the assessment or assisting with the assessment and design phase. And so that's where that money from NOAA comes from. I've got to keep track of it and also provide that technical assistance to the state and working with Princeton Hydro. But I probably should have called this federal statutory compliance, because I don't really want to necessarily talk about regulations. I want to talk about federal statutes. And what's that? Yeah, no, I don't want to get in the weeds, but I think it's very important that we have this aspect. So next slide, if you could. So there's two statutes that I just want to cover, why we're here tonight, why we NOAA, on behalf of NOAA, we appreciate you being here, because public input is everything. We need to know, what are the concerns that people may have, whether they're positive or negative towards a project. And so with NEPA, NEPA was passed in 1970, right? 70. And so the value of that is to try to make sure that we're taking into account public engagement to address projects that are going to move forward or potentially move forward for any kind of effects on the environment, whether it's natural resources, cultural resources, socioeconomics, and even now, things that relate to climate change, how climate change may affect the project, and in turn, how a project may affect climate change. So those are all aspects that we need to take into account as part of NEPA. But what NOAA did in 2015 is we created what's called the Programmatic Environmental Impact Statement, and addresses the typical type of restoration projects that we work on across the country. There's about 120 of me's all over the place across the country working on restoration like this. And so that programmatic helps us take care of a process in a very concise and relatively short-term way. And I know you probably think this is a lot of jargon, but it's very important that you are aware of why we're doing this and making sure that we're trying to work with the public. And so we use that PEIS to help start the process. And so before we awarded the money to the state of Connecticut, we went through what's called an inclusion analysis, and we kind of go back to the PIS to see what are the typical impacts that you have with dam removals. And dam removals is one of them in that package. And so then we create that assessment in short to try to truncate all the process of trying to get the money to the state so you keep it moving. But the other part is why I'm here tonight, to make sure I'm listening to you, to be to hear what people may have for concerns, whatever they may be. Okay, so at any rate, if the funds, and so like I said earlier, the funds that NOAA has awarded to the state go towards assessment and design permitting phase. If they are going to apply for more NOAA funds through the current federal monies, there's a lot of money through BIL, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and then the Inflation Reduction Act. So more jargon, but basically there's a lot of money available right now. The state may apply as a proposal to try to secure additional money to implement the project. And so that could cover another part of it. And so we would anticipate that more NEPA analysis would be done under the PIs to make sure that it's falling within the parameters of that document. So next slide, please. The other one is as part of looking at of potential effects of a project is through the National Historic Preservation Act. And as some people had talked about it earlier, we're talking about historical resources. All these structures are quite old, and they're over a century old pretty much. And so what NOAA does under the statutory requirements is to consult with the State Historic Preservation Office, as well as any tribal historic preservation offices that may have an interest in the site and its resources there. And so in June of 2022, there was initial project notification form that was submitted to the SHPO in Connecticut here. And just to let them know, here's the potential project that may occur. And so they start to understand that what's out there, and so that's the initial consultation, that the federal agency that has a responsibility to coordinate with them. And so that happened in June, and then in November, under Section 106, we did a site visit with Kathy Labate and some of her staff, and she's here tonight from the SHPO if you had any specific questions on this, because I'm not a historical expert by no means. I'm a restoration ecologist, but I've done about 45 dam removals now, and the process stays pretty much the same. And so you stay in your lane, and you do things right. And so we did that site visit in November, and of course we got feedback from Kathy and her staff. And the next step that we got was trying to get a formalized response. So what we learned that part of this, because it's more or less a historic industrial site, is to do things with a analysis which includes a historic American engineering record or HERE documentation. And so what that is it includes typically a certain format to describe the site, and there's a whole bunch of different information that needs to go into that. But it also includes graphics, so you take measurements of the site, and so you create graphics as part of that documentation, and photographs. And so these are all put together to basically, if a structure is going to be removed, you want to have good documentation that well defines what had been there, so it's all part of the package that goes to the record that people can always go back to see what had been there. And so, and I should say that although it hasn't been really started to much extent, there is a historical consultant that's going to work with Princeton Hydro to do all the work, being experts, not like me being a restoration ecologist. So that's what the next process is for the historical concerns, and so I just wanted to be aware of that. And if you can hit the last slide, to make sure I cover everything. Yeah, so just to summarize, the overall approach, of course, is to minimize adverse effects to the historical resources that are there. And that red line that we were looking at before, that area of potential effect, that really goes back to historical issues as well. So if you take the dam out and the impoundment drops down, what hypothetically could happen is you might find historical resources within the riverbed that no one's aware of because you can't see them and it's hard to find them. And so that is an area that would be covered as part of that APE. And the way everything is finalized is an agreement, a formalized agreement, a memorandum of agreement between the federal agency, the SHPO, potentially TIPOs, the state probably, and any other potential interested parties. And so that all comes together, and it's a signed agreement of how things are going to be carried out. And if there are impacts, adverse effects, there's different ways that mitigation is carried out. And that's just an example of a photo of a project I worked on up in New Hampshire, but that's like a road signage that told a story about the Homestead Dam that we took out back in 2010. But there's different ways to do this work, and that what would be going into a memorandum of agreement, working with Kathy and other interested parties to come up with a way to show, to use it as, could be public education. There's different ways to do it. So I just want to make sure people understand that we're in a nice process, or we want to carry out the process in a very discreet way. I think that's it for me, right? Yeah. Well, thanks, and I can answer other questions after Matt's presentation.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm Matt Goklowski. I'm a supervising fisheries biologist with the Connecticut Deep Fisheries Division in the Habitat Conservation Enhancement Program and Diadromous Fish Restoration Program. And today I'm going to be giving you an overview of some of the benefits to fish passage and fisheries resources that are associated with this potential project. Next slide. So the Farmington River is widely known as one of the best cold water fisheries resources in the Northeast region. A big reason for that is that the river receives a steady release of cold, high-quality water from the base of the Goodwin Dam. And this essentially creates optimal conditions for growth and survival of trout in the river. The upper Farmington River is stocked with between 40 and 50,000 trout on an annual basis, and it also supports a robust population of wild brown trout in the river. Roughly 33 kilometers of the river are designated as trout management areas, and the lower Collinsville Dam falls within the middle of one of our seasonal trout management areas. Next slide. So the existing conditions in the area of the lower Collinsville Dam, the section of river immediately below the dam is a very popular fishing spot, both in the spring and fall, primarily for trout. We have observed some trout spawning activity in the riffle below the dam, but in the area immediately upstream of the dam, we generally consider that relatively low quality habitat for trout and some of our other stream fish species. One of the big reasons for that is that when you have water behind a dam, it's not naturally free-flowing, it sits there and it warms up in the sun. And you can see on the graphic on the right side of the screen there, we had measured water temperature in the river last year at a number of different locations. You'll see that red line in the middle. All the locations to the left of that are located upstream of the Collinsville dams, and the locations to the right of that are downstream of the Collinsville dams. So what we found is the sample sites below the lower Collinsville Dam, water temperature was, on this particular day in the middle of July, it was almost 25 degrees Celsius. And anytime you have water above about 20 degrees Celsius, that starts to get too warm for trout, and they move and seek out other areas of the river. The biggest impact of the dam is that it is also a barrier to the upstream migration of both our resident fish species and our migratory fish species as well. So next slide, please. So we're envisioning some potential post-project conditions to look much better for our resident species and our migratory fish species in the river. So if the dam is removed, the impounded section, the ponded section, is going to be converted to a naturally free-flowing stream. That's going to restore full aquatic organism passage through this area, and it's really going to improve habitat quality for all life stages of trout and many of our other resident species in the river. Fish are going to have access to higher quality substrates. The water is going to be more oxygenated. We're anticipating increased macroinvertebrate production, and we're anticipating that water within the impoundment and the area downstream from the impoundment is going to be much cooler and better to support some of our cold water species. Next slide, please. The biggest benefits that we're anticipating from a potential dam removal project here are really the improved upstream passage for the migratory species that we're looking to restore within the river. So we have 5 target species that we're looking to restore for our diatomous fish species that move between freshwater and saltwater to complete their life cycles. Of those, 4 species are known as anadromous fish species. These fish spawn in freshwater. Their juveniles migrate down to the ocean where they grow and live for a few years before they return to freshwater to spawn. The 4 target species that we're looking to restore populations of in the Farmington River are alewife, blueback herring, American shad, and sea lamprey. And it's because of their life cycle, it's really critical that we provide opportunities for them to move upstream, and barriers like the lower Collinsville Dam can really impact their ability. There's currently no way for these species to move around the dam. Our 5th target species is the American eel, and it has a catadromous life cycle where it actually spawns in the ocean and juveniles move up into fresh waters to live and grow before moving back out to the sea to spawn. For them, they could actually ascend the lower Collinsville Dam under certain flow conditions, but it's definitely an impediment for them, and when they're climbing up the dam, they're vulnerable to predation. So removing the dam will also enhance their upstream passage as well. Next slide. So the Farmington River watershed is really the top priority watershed for anadromous fish restoration in the state of Connecticut. The Farmington River is one of the largest rivers in the state, and it is the largest tributary of the Connecticut River. There are relatively few dams on the river currently, and there are no dams on the main stem Connecticut River downstream of the confluence. So there's a limited number of man-made barriers, and within the watershed there's actually a limited number of natural barriers as well. So there is a lot of potential high-quality habitat available for these anadromous species to make use of. The river is also a very important and popular recreational area for anglers, paddlers, and people that just want to observe wildlife. There are actually 2 federally designated wild and scenic sections of the river, as Ramona mentioned earlier. So there's a lot of interest and support for ecological restoration within the watershed. So next slide, please. So because of all that, that potential within the watershed, the state and many other organizations have invested an incredible amount of resources toward improving fish passage and aquatic connectivity in the watershed. So I'm just going to briefly take you through some of the past projects along the river that have happened in recent years. So the first barrier on the Farmington River is the Rainbow Dam. It's located about 9 miles upstream from the confluence with the Connecticut River. It is a privately owned dam, and it is not subject to the FERC regulatory process. It's operated as a hydropower dam. But what that means is the state and other organizations other federal agencies like NOAA and Fish and Wildlife Service really have a limited ability to, through the regulatory process, require any fish passage improvements at the dam. That being said, the state of Connecticut does own and operate an upstream, a fishway, as well as a downstream bypass structure for downstream passage. Both of these structures were designed for the passage of Atlantic salmon, and they don't perform as well for the target species that we're looking to recover right now. But our upper management within DEEP is currently engaging in some high-level conversations on ways of potentially reconnecting the stream and enhancing fish passage at this location. So next slide. The next barrier on the river was the Spoonville Dam, located a few miles upstream from the Rainbow Dam. So this project, there was a project to fully remove the remnants of this dam in 2012, and now this section of the river is fully restored and acting like a natural river. Next slide. The next barrier on the river is located at River Mile 31, and that is the Winchell Smith Dam in the town of Farmington. This is an old timber crib structure. It is partially breached, and we consider this a partial barrier. Some of our migratory fish species are able to pass this under certain flow conditions, but ideally we'd like to see this dam fully removed. One of our partner organizations, the Farmington River Watershed Association, is sponsoring a project to remove this dam, and we're anticipating that this could be removed as soon as next summer. Next slide. The Lower Collinsville Dam, which is the subject of this presentation, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I'll mention again that this is the only structure that on the river that does not currently have a means for anadromous fish to pass it. So it is currently at the end of the road for those fish right now. Next slide. The Upper Collinsville Dam, which is located about 1 mile upstream from the Lower Collinsville Dam, recently was granted a license through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC. And as part of that license, the operator of the dam was required to install and operate state-of-the-art fish passage facilities at the dam. So these consist of a denial fish ladder for upstream passage of most of our species, a eel pass, which is specifically designed for upstream passage of juvenile eels, as well as a downstream bypass, surface bypass structure, and a barrier screen, which will allow for safe downstream passage of all of our species, as well as a zigzag eel pass, which is the first of its kind in North America, which is specifically designed to pass adult American eel over the dam. So this is just a mile upstream from the lower Collinsville Dam, and it is currently accessible to resident fish species. But if we are able to remove the lower Collinsville Dam, that will immediately open essentially the bulk of the watershed that we're targeting for restoration. Next slide. So the long-term outlook for fish passage in the Farmington River watershed is actually very bright. So with the existing conditions and infrastructure present on the river, anadromous fish species have access to up to about 52 miles of riverine habitat. With the removal of the lower Collinsville Dam, that would open up an additional roughly 18 miles of main stem riverine habitat and up to 40 additional miles of tributary habitat for these species. And we anticipate that this could lead to the watershed producing regionally significant spawning runs of American shad, about 45,000 fish returning on an annual basis, as well as almost 300,000 both of alewife and blueback herring returning to the river on an annual basis. So with that, I will turn it back to Ramona.
So that was just kind of a quick overview, of the potential removal. I know we just finished a conceptual design. I just want to say nothing is set in stone. That's why we're trying to reach out to get everybody's questions and concerns. And we're going to open up for questions, but if sometime after you have some question that pops in your mind, you can always email me, and and here's my contact information. So I'm going to open up for any more questions that somebody had. I'm just going to keep an eye on the clock because we don't want to get kicked out. We're going to get kicked out. Yeah.
I just had two questions. One, what do you estimate the cost of the removal of the dam will be?
So I don't know if anybody heard the estimated cost. I think we reached out to Princeton Hydro, the estimated cost just for construction, not including the design and the conceptual work.
The overall project, how much is it gonna cost?
I would say, maybe Chuck, you want to think? Maybe I think it was estimated the construction would be about $5 million, but that's just construction. We have not included the cost. What that would mean, just like hiring a contractor to the actual physical removal of the dam. But we are not even at that phase. We're still in the conceptual design, so that is not including the design, and then there'd be an engineering administration. So we haven't really worked out the whole full cost, but we're estimating the construction with the construction contractor, just the physical removal to be about $5 million. But I'm gonna say inflation is happening.
Yeah, it's hard for me to really understand what that number means.
Correct.
Because if you haven't included all the professional services, I'm sure Princeton, they need to get paid as well. And I just had one other question for Matt. I don't know, appreciating that you open up the lower dam, there's a dam another mile up. And I understand from your presentation that there's fish passage, so that doesn't exist with the lower dam. Would the impoundment temperature beyond the hydro dam, what I'll call the second,
The upper Collinsville Dam?
Yeah, the upper, thank you, the upper Collinsville Dam, how would that temperature potentially affect the species that you're thinking will be able to migrate northward?
So specifically for the migratory fish species, they're typically moving up water, especially the anadromous species. They're moving during the spring, essentially, so between April and June, they're gonna be moving upriver. It's generally not that warm in the river at that time of the year, so,
Well, when would it be warmer?
Let's
I mean,
say
it seems
another,
like June is summer here, it's hot.
your
And-
slide seemed to imply that this is gonna have some significant measurable positive impact between the temperature of the water above the dam, the temperature of the water below the dam. In fact, there's another dam with a large impoundment area, it isn't gonna be, so in what sense is there any meaningful way to even presume you're gonna see that kind of temperature change in the lower water?
well, it's difficult to predict exactly what the
Okay,
temperature
that's
difference is
what
gonna
I
be,
took.
but lessening the amount of impoundment is gonna have some impact on temperature within the stream.
You're cutting it by half at least because of that, the area between that first dam and that second.
I don't know enough hydrology to know.
There's a huge area that sits there in the sun. I mean, there is no question that that's wide open and receiving a lot of direct sunlight, so.
But the area my point was that the area on the
Above
above the upper
yeah.
dam
Right.
is the same thing.
But you have half the amount of water that's hot now.
Why is there half the
Why-
amount of water?
Because
That's-
if you remove the
It's
second
coming
dam.
from that area coming down. It's not flowing up that way,
Correct,
it's
but you
coming
have the hot
down.
water that's coming to the second area that now sits and heats up even more once you remove that dam, that area's not there. So the water comes over the first dam and flows down the river. There's not a second place where it picks up the extra heat.
Yeah,
But
okay.
if I could just.
I guess that would be a question for me to know, like, what you really think the temperature north of the upper dam is gonna be, because I don't know what importance that temperature and that sensitivity has to fish, but I would think May to June, like that, it doesn't get much hotter than, I mean, maybe in August, July, and August it's hotter. But it's not. It's hotter now.
Okay. All right, so I think, I mean, that's a good question for Matt, and then maybe Matt will be able to talk to you a little bit more off stream, because I think there's a lot more questions. No.
When
Go
do
ahead.
they anticipate removal and how would it be removed?
So, if in a perfect world and everybody says this is a great idea and nobody has any questions and the permits go through and there's no delays, it would be
Okay, but on Earth.
you know, sometime in 2024. But that's, once again, I would say nothing is set in stone. We are flexible with the movement, with when this is going to happen. Mm-mm.
Will they use explosives to?
That's a part of where we're working with the conceptual design. If that's an option, then we have to go through that to see if that's even feasible. But if there could be just a mechanical removal, so I mean, I think that was an option that was put out there, but that still needs to be greatly looked into if there is a possibility of that.
Because I want to bring popcorn and beer. What is it that's feeding?
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. All the way in the back. Yep.
Well, first I'll say I'm totally against this. To take and invest $5 million to gain 2,000 feet of river, disrupt 18,000 yards of sediment that's gonna go downstream, that's an enormous amount of silt. Now you're gonna disrupt possible contaminants from the Collins Company because you're gonna drop, from what I'm hearing, 12 feet of water, when you probably could put a fish ladder up alongside the raceway, as he's calling it, for $1.5 million. That's just input.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh wait, no, sorry. Over here, I saw you turn first.
I just wanted to say thank you. I thought the presentation was very informative.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Just one question and maybe a comment. I was wondering if somebody could speak to the permitting path, just kind of a general idea of the boxes that have to be checked. And specifically, I'm wondering if the Army Corps of Engineers has any involvement with this. And then, that's kind of the question. The comment is, I think that, you know, there needs to be maybe a level set in terms of what you can expect for potential timing, because I expect the permitting process is going to be very long, very involved, And then the other piece of that is that just gets you the design. You have to go shop around funding at that point. So I would have to say it's probably at least 5 years out, if not more. But-
So, I'm gonna give the permitting question to Chuck Lee, who's the assistant director of their dam safety programs, which include dam safety, and he could touch on the permitting aspect. But we are engaging, it won't take 5 years for that. The permitting process and with the group, it will take a little bit, but we will engage with the Army Corps. We are already starting to engage. And we are, as I think Jim mentioned, there is a lot of money with the BIL, the bipartisan infrastructure law legislation. So we are looking into actual federal funding for this as well. So I'm gonna hand it over to Chuck to talk a little bit about the permitting process.
So the project will require a dam safety permit from the Connecticut DEP. Within the dam safety permit, there's also a lot of other permits that are embedded in that permit, where if it weren't a dam removal project, it might be, they might have to individually get those permits, but flood management certifications embedded in the dam safety permit. Other aspects like diversion permit would be included. So it'll require a Connecticut DEP dam safety permit. Also, some level of Army Corps permit. I'm not really sure right now, but the Army Corps will be involved. Because there's no fill really going on here, it'll probably be easier to get this permit than it might be for other projects.
And the National Park Service.
Right, is National Park Service gonna be permitting it?
They're gonna have to review it because you're in a wild and scenic river.
Right, that would be, right.
No, I saw him. Go ahead.
Amy just made a report.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
I was kind of interested in some of the wildlife aspect. I live there, and my neighbors will tell you that I swim in that impoundment every day, June, July, August, September. I'm in there constantly. I know it very well. I've lived there for over 20 years. And this is many things. I think if I had lived in 1912 and seen them blowing up the dam and building that thing, I would have hated it. But I didn't. I live in it now. And I live where it is now, and it is a unique ecosystem. It is embedded between two dams. And I spend every day looking at the birds and the animals that live in that impoundment that we have created. And, I hear about blasting, and I think about the nesting pair of eagles that lives right there. And I'm wondering what we're doing for them. I hear about reducing the level of water, and I think about the nesting pair of ospreys. And what are we gonna do for them? I know that there are at least 2 active beaver lodges that need that depth, that need that water there. And what are we gonna do for them? And so, I love hearing about, it's gonna grow, it's gonna be beautiful, we're gonna get, a gorgeous array of beautiful flowers and plants there, but we have a gorgeous array there now. We have created an ecosystem. The animals didn't ask us to dam all of this, but we did. And we created this area for them. And when I walk, I've documented over 55 species of birds in this area. And so I worry about what we're gonna do so that we can get, and I'm not excited about the eels, but I understand the fish. I understand the fish have to move. But I also wonder what we're doing ecologically to this space that we created that animals are now populating and now living in. And what's gonna happen to them when we say in 2024, 2025, so sorry, you don't have a lake anymore, you have a river. And where are they gonna go? And where are they gonna fish? I spent a lovely night until dusk listening to all the eagles, mom and dad, training this year's fledge how to fish in this impoundment, not down below the dam and not up above, in this space. And it is a beautiful space that we have created, and I think we need to be thoughtful. I'm glad we have a lot of money that we can spend on this. It's great to have funds, but I think we really need to be thoughtful about what has been created, because it has value. It has value to all of us. It is a beautiful, magical, and unique spot that our forebears created back in 1910. And so I think we need to be really thoughtful about that.
I do think you bring up a very good point, and I think that is something that we should also take in consideration. I like to say that, you know, these state dams, we are not an island, we are a whole Department of Environmental and Energy Protection. We do talk within, and we will reach out to other sections in the wildlife section within the department, you know, to make sure that we are gonna be protective. Mhm. Okay.
Just added to that, I live along the river as well, I've been there for 44 years. The area, the impoundment area is, the lake aspect of it is used a lot during the summer. There's kayaking there. You know, a river you can kayak down, but you can't kayak back up. People park along the river and kayak with small kids. There's fishing, there's dog bathing, there's swimming. The idea that it's gonna go away and turn into something that looks wild and scenic, because the lower portion going from the lower dam down into Unionville, I mean, I walk along the trail as well, and it's a whole different view, and it's beautiful, but it's kind of, you really can't do much with it as a human being, other than, you know, the fishing is, I guess, very good, but, it's fast running water, and it's, you know, it's just different. So it's, you guys did a good presentation on it, especially, you know, the fish aspect of it. The question from a few people is, the fish haven't gone up there in 75 years, what makes you think they're gonna go now? And that's possibly a silly, dumb question, but it's kind of
No dumb
like,
questions.
why are we
They gotta get past the
concerned
rainbow
with this?
dam.
Sorry?
They gotta get past the rainbow dam first.
Well, yeah, so, I mean, I know, when they started with the upper dam, to put the power in, and they were talking about the fish ladders and all. I understand, I think that's a requirement now in some places to put fish ladders in. And I can see why that maybe brings some health up in the species, but losing the lake that's out in front, I'm calling it a lake, is the impoundment area, that where you see big to little bears, foxes, beaver, porcupines, foxes, I guess.
Weasels?
Weasels. I mean, there's a lot of wildlife down there that wander about, and it's pretty interesting to watch. I mean, you see the large birds, they're, I don't know, it's just, I think we're sometimes in too much of a hurry to get rid of stuff that we have and just put it all in documentation and put a steel sign up on it and say, this is where this was, and so we have it. I mean, why bother documenting it? You just destroy it. End of statement.
Thank you.
Would
I was
you-
gonna wait, but I was gonna want the behind you. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Hi, so I completely understand your perspective, and I know there are concerns about the cost. But what I have to say is, right now, the money is here to do it, and understanding that Rainbow Dam is still there. But 10 years from now, we can find ourselves in a situation where Rainbow Dam's coming out, and for some reason, if we had not removed Lower Collinsville, we still have that one barrier where we have no fish passage. And number two, think about another scenario where, you know, there was a horrible tragedy, you know, several years ago, and the state was sued. And what if it happens again, and the state is sued for $5 million? And we can say then, we had an opportunity to take that dam down, and not only is there another loss of life, but now taxpayers are out of several $1 million due to, or more, due to another lawsuit. So, you know, we're thinking here and now, but, you know, going forward, we have an opportunity, and change is very hard, but the river is going to be better for it, and I think we'll be better for it in the future and the future generations. So.
Would you know if the trails in that area would be shut down during the removal process?
So it would be a temporary closure, and we would, I think that's still up for discussion, and I think we're trying to have conversations. So it would be temporary, and it would ultimately, we try to do it when it would not be like a highly populated time, so maybe try more towards, in the colder seasons. But, that is a very big consideration there about the rails to trails there. And we want to make sure that, and we're trying to make sure we have notice and access, but it would not be it would be a temporary closure. Steve, and then I'll come up with this.
I'd like to make a couple of points. One is about the uniqueness of the impoundment. I think that what makes it special are the people who live there and are sentimentally attached to it, and that's totally understandable. But the state of Connecticut has over 4,000 dams in it, which makes us probably the most densely dammed state in the nation. And there's nothing ecologically unique about that impoundment. In fact, impounded waters are more common in the state of Connecticut than free-flowing waters are. And a lot of people, and we've done a lot of dam removals in the state of Connecticut. This is not the first time, and we've got a lot of experiences before and after. And there's always concern that we're going to destroy nature, and that we're going to do this horrible thing for fish and wildlife, or especially wildlife. But in fact, we don't destroy nature, we convert it. So yeah, there may be fewer mallards, but there's going to be more great blue herons. There's going to be less sunfish, and there's going to be more brook trout. The eagles and the ospreys are not going to care. They're going to do their business because they have huge home ranges. So I think that it's important to recognize that there will be changes, but there will not be wholesale destruction. I also, until just now, nobody's mentioned the public safety aspect of it. Those drownings, those tragic drownings lately, were not the first there. There have been drownings at that dam throughout. And as long as that dam, with its OG-shaped spillway, which creates that sweeper hydraulic, you go by there at certain flows, and there's basketballs and beach balls and rubber rafts right up against the dam, and you're saying, why don't they flow downstream? It's because the hydraulics keep them there, and they keep swimmers there too. So as long as that spillway is there, we're going to have more drownings. And it's one of the considerations when we removed the Spoonville Dam. There was drownings at Spoonville, and we got rid of Spoonville, and there haven't been drownings. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind on this. But just for the record, I think this is a great project, and I support it.
So we kind of got to wrap up. So maybe I got one more question, and then I know, please email me, and we can get to them, but we got it because the library's going to be closing. So I think, did you have a question?
Quick one, maybe we can do this quick, but you opened by saying that there was a 2011 or 2012 economic study.
Feasibility
showing
study.
It was not feasible to do electric generation. Now, that's 12 years old.
Correct.
And life in the world of energy generation has changed a lot in 12 years, and it's still changing. Has anybody looked at that? It's actually updated the results of the study to reflect real world data?
Canton Hydro, who developed the upper dam, they looked at it and said, no, we're not touching that, we'd lose money on it. So they passed on it just recently.
That's not true.
So I want to once again thank everybody for coming out. We really appreciate everybody coming and participating. Like I said, we're going to have more public outreach and meetings to get everybody's thoughts and questions. And once again, please reach out to me, ramona.good@ct.gov, if you have any more questions you would like to send. So thank you, everybody.
your host, Kurt Barwis. Today, I have a very special guest, Dr. Andrew Lin.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Veterans Corner. My name's Chuck Wooden.
Decision for ourselves for this week, if we want to be made well.
Hi, welcome to the crack of dawn. It's Dawn Lombardi. I'm starting the painting. It's going to be the cliffs with some water. Love it.
He took me on the sets of Lost in Space, Batman.
Everybody has a story. What's yours? Until next time.